Generation Tech. We've talked recently about 5 weapons and vehicles that the Empire correctly retired because they were facing new enemies and new struggles. Today we'll be taking a look at 5 weapons and vehicles the Empire should have carried over from the Republic era. On a side note, we won't be talking about the Venator-class Star Destroyer in this list because we did a video solely dedicated to why Emperor Palpatine retired this ship during the rise of the Empire. There's no friendlier sight to a clone infantryman than a low-altitude assault transport making its final approach on the way to a sketchy combat landing. The LAAT represents a ride home, an evac for wounded friends and allies. It could also represent reinforcements in the form of a clone infantry squad, or perhaps even an entire all-terrain tactical enforcer with that mass driver gun. The LAAT also had a healthy amount of offensive armaments on board, including a belt-fed missile system and laser turrets. And so, this one single ship fulfilled many of the different needs that the Grand Army of the Republic had during the Clone Wars. When the Empire rose to power, the LAAT was more or less discarded. In its place, the Empire used 2 different vessels. First, we have the LAAT-LE Patrol gunship, also formerly known as the Republic Police gunship. This was a smaller civilian version of the LAAT, had less firepower and munitions on board, and could only carry a limited amount of soldiers. This made the LAAT-LE a pretty good vessel to use in populated urban areas where collateral damage could be a problem. But the main ship that really does take over most of the LAAT's workload was the Lambda-class T-4A shuttle. Although initially designed only to ferry around high-ranking Imperial officials, the Lambda class would become the shuttle of choice for all Imperial forces, including the Stormtrooper Corps and also logistics units. In my opinion, this is because the LAAT civilian patrol ship is not capable of space flight. It's not sealed against vacuum. Of course, there's no specific information that actually says this, so this is all speculation. But the LAAT used by the Republic military definitely was space capable. And compared to the Lambda-class shuttle, the LAAT was actually smaller but could hold 50% more passengers and was much more heavily armed. And with the LAAT's massive side doors, entering and exiting the ship while under fire was much easier and quicker than the Lambda-class's single ramp exit, otherwise known as a murder funnel for rebels waiting with heavy repeating blasters. Overall, the LAAT is probably one of the best designed systems coming out of the Clone Wars. In my opinion, they should have kept it and upgraded it. In our last episode, we talked about how the ATTE wasn't exactly the most efficient main battle tank or whatever role it was required to fill. One of the major reasons why we dislike the ATTE is its form of locomotion. It uses walker legs, which are just terribly slow for almost every type of situation, especially when you compare it to a vehicle using repulsor lifts. The Separatist armored assault tank was an excellent design idea. The actual execution of that design is a whole nother issue. But did you know that Rothana Heavy Engineering, a subsidiary of Quad Drive Yards and the creator of the ATTE, also tried to create their own repulsor lift tank? Meet the TX-130 Sabre class fighter tank. It's labeled a fighter tank because it actually is immensely fast and often compared to the Jedi-operated Delta 7 Aether Sprite class starfighter, except for it's a tank. And so the TX-130 isn't exactly a main battle tank. It doesn't rely on its armor, instead it relies on its speed to avoid enemy shots. Meanwhile, the TX-130 can also dish out a lot of pain with their 2 ordnance launchers and 2 heavy lasers. The TX-130 also has a very low profile, especially when compared to the AAT tank. It's also much smaller in overall tonnage. It's essentially a light tank, but it could do a lot more. And it's definitely much more useful than the TX-225 GAVW Occupier Combat Assault Tank we see during the skirmish on Jedha. When badasses like Captain Rex go into battle, they often plunge headfirst, dual-wielding the DC-17 hand blaster from Blastech Industries. This is because this Republic sidearm was considered one of the most reliable and toughest firearms available. I mean, look at this thing. It essentially is a brick. No attachments that can snap off, no flimsy parts. It's built for bludgeoning people in the face when it runs out of ammo. DC-17s never fail, and they're also extremely lightweight, well-balanced, and had a pretty good rate of fire. Apparently, the DC-17 shots were even more powerful than the larger DC-15 blaster carbine. A good handgun doesn't require much more than that. This is probably also why the 1911 is still used by some American military units. If it ain't broke, you know? And so when the Galactic Empire replaced the classic DC-17 with the SE-14R light repeating blaster, I really wasn't amused. The SE-14R is actually based off the SR combat pistol used by the Separatist droid army. The R in SE-14R signifies that this version of the pistol is capable of firing at an extremely high rate. There's no real reason to make your sidearm a fully automatic weapon. First of all, this is a secondary weapon, so it needs to be cheap, simple, and reliable. Making your secondary fully automatic makes the weapon expensive, complicated, and unreliable. A blaster pistol platform is way too small for fully automatic firing. The recoil and firepower is just going to be way too intense. It's like firing a fully automatic Glock. There's also the issue of chewing through ammunition way too quickly, and the barrel overheating from excessive use. Din Djarin attempted to use the SE-14R while undercover as an Imperial soldier, and he found out firsthand just how reliable of a weapon this thing is. When the Republic collapsed, the Empire more or less cut expensive programs like the Incom ARC-170, but also other fighter programs like the ETA Actus II Jedi Fighter, for obvious reasons, along with the V19 Torrent Starfighter. The Empire instead opted to use the Alpha III Nimbus-class V-Wing as the main stopgap measure until Senior Fleet Systems developed their TIE Fighter line. The V-Wing was a later Clone Wars model built by Quad Systems Engineering. It had the fuselage that was reminiscent of a Delta VII Aether Sprite or the later A-Wing. On its sides, you had a pair of foils for cooling. This was a very agile and speedy fighter, but it cost almost twice as much as the V19 Torrent Starfighter. At the beginning of the war, the V19 Torrent fighter was just a prototype that was rushed into production. Before the Venator-class Star Destroyer arrived a few months after Geonosis, the V19 Torrent fighter made up the bulk of the Republic Navy. It was essential at the Battle of Geonosis. The V19 was designed specifically to escort LAAT gunships onto target, and they were made maneuverable enough to go up against the most agile enemy droid fighters. As the war went on, the V19s were continuously upgraded and given hyperdrives. But at their core, these V19 Torrent fighters are short-range interceptors, just like the TIE fighters that would eventually replace them. Now, we've done multiple videos about how terrible the TIE fighter design is. We've even played Star Wars Squadrons in VR to see what it's like to sit in the cockpit, and let's just say those two giant solar panels make terrific blind spots. The V19 is superior in many ways. Not only does it have the same kind of flight characteristics, it also has that hyperdrive like we were talking about, and it also has concussion missile launchers, which are really good against capital ships. While there were definitely political and economic reasons why the TIE Fighter program was adopted, the V19 Torrent Starfighter, which was just 3 years old when the Empire rose, was still very much a viable option. The Republic occasionally captured droids intact and reprogrammed them for a variety of purposes, including using them for Special Forces operations. We're not exactly sure why the Galactic Republic didn't adopt the use of battle droids. I mean, this would have really helped them in the earlier years of the war where they were completely outnumbered by the Separatist droid army. I would say that the Galactic Empire could also benefit from the use of droids. What the Empire needed quickly was a massive military force that could keep the peace. If you take a look at how the Imperial Army trained the Stormtrooper Corps and how the Imperial Navy trained their pilots, you'll notice that the Empire puts a great emphasis on loyalty and shedding one's individual identity. This is why droids are almost a perfect fit for the Galactic Empire. They lack purpose other than following orders, and they're cheap to manufacture and maintain. If the Empire were to mass manufacture these droids, they could probably provide enough security forces for their entire territory. This would have prevented the need for the Tarkin Doctrine, which eventually led to the Death Star program. If you think about it, the Clone Wars was only 3.5 years old, and all of the vehicles and weapons that were fighting in it were basically designed for it. So you have a lot of new designs that aren't exactly that out of date. So when Emperor Palpatine wipes out everything and recreates an army from scratch, it actually does waste a lot of resources. Let me know in the comment section below if I've missed any other vehicles that you think should have been carried over from the Republic period to the Galactic Empire. And also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.